social control. Yeah. Now, this isn't just the government. This isn't just larger groups. We do this in smaller groups too. Let's say, for example, I'm a member of a friend group and I'm the only one in my group that does not have some tattoo somewhere or a piercing. I may get pressure now and then to do that, to conform to the group by getting a tattoo or getting a piercing because I'm the only one who doesn't, right? If I'm the only one of a group of friends who goes out that doesn't drink, I may feel occasional pressure or feel separated in some way because I'm not joining in that behavior. Peer pressure itself is a form of social control. It's a form of norming you to the behavior of the group. So it can happen at a very small level. It can happen at a very broad level. But as it says here on the slide at the very top, the regulation and enforcement of norms. That can be broad cultural norms. Again, it can be small group norms along there. Now, when we look at it culturally from a government or regional standpoint, the whole point of it, again, is to maintain social order. Now, there's a key here, not that you should let everything fall apart all of a sudden, but part of what maintains social order and what maintains our routines is that everyone just agrees to go along with the rules. If everyone today just decided we're not going to play by these rules anymore, we're going to do our own thing, you may think, oh, you're going to get arrested or locked down. There aren't actually enough police or military to enforce social order over the entire population if the entire population were to say, no, we're not going to do this anymore. So you need socialization is a big part of that from the earlier section. Set those norms in, put that expected behavior in you. This is how we're going to behave here. This is how we're going to act. And these are the norms. Very simple ones like driving on the right side of the road, stopping at stoplights, things like that. Those are rules that were put in to maintain traffic flow in a safe and normalized way. We try to do that with a bunch of norms through here. And when we say sanctions, that can be, as the other two slides say, either some sort of legal punishment if we have a law establishing that norm, or just, as it says here, informal sanction, getting negative feedback from the environment for it. Let's flip that tattoo piercing example for a moment. Let's say my friend group, that we have our own little in-group social norms, have no tattoos or piercings, that they kind of look down on that or ostracize that in some way. And one day I show up with a huge tattoo down my back and piercings all over the place. That I will get negative response from them for that. Let's take a quick look at just a clip from the movie Mean Girls, which is a good example of this.
Having lunch with the plastics was like leaving the actual world and entering Girl World. And Girl World had a lot of rules.
You can't wear a tank top 2 days in a row, and you can only wear your hair in a ponytail once a week. So I guess you picked today. Oh, and we only wear jeans or track pants on Fridays. Now, if you break any of these rules, you can't sit with us at lunch. Well, I mean, not just you, like, any of us. Okay, like, if I was wearing jeans today, I would be sitting over there with the art freaks. Oh, and we always vote before we ask someone to eat lunch with us, because you have to be considerate of the rest of the group. Well, I mean, you wouldn't buy a skirt without asking your friends first if it looks good on you.
I wouldn't?
Right.
Right? That's not a movie, that's a bleeding documentary. Pretty much any movie that involves a high school scenario will show you the cliques, and each clique has its own set of norms to it and their own little kind of ostracizing if you don't stay within those norms. Its own sort of micro-social control. Now, the easiest way to maintain social control is fear. Fear. In fact, on the psychology side, we've really known for a long time the easy 3-step process to kind of maintain control or to get people to follow you or give you money or whatever. That is to make someone afraid of something, tell them who to blame for it, and tell them that you can either protect them from it or solve it, and you'll get people following you. It is so easy right now to look at, especially our political environment, cultural environment in general, and see where fear is used on you to get you to maintain kind of social control over you. Also to maintain how you see the world, what you think about in different groups, or how things should be done. It's being used all over the place. At the end of this section, we're going to look at some political propaganda where fear is definitely being used by both sides, not just so you won't support the other side. We've taken a really dangerous step the last decade into making you hate the other side and actually feel like they are a threat. When in fact, here's something that a lot of you aren't going to agree with. The two main political parties in our country, their rhetoric is different, but when you look at what they actually do, what they actually get done, there isn't a big difference there. Each one will propose different bills or laws that seem to fit their side specifically, but not many of those pass. A lot of times they just do that, so you as a voter will say, oh, look, these people are trying to promote the agenda that I like, but they'll propose it knowing it's not going to get anywhere. Take a look at the last three administrations, for that matter, specifically the first 2 years of each of the last three administrations, because Trump came in with a Republican majority in the House and Senate for 2 years. Obama came in with a Democratic majority in the House and Senate. W. Bush came in with also Republican majority. And all the claims of all these things we were going to do during that time, a lot of it turned out not to actually happen. A lot of it turned out just to be rhetoric. A lot of bills were passed to do things, but those bills never went anywhere. Each of them had a few things they did along the way, but not as many as their supporters claimed they did, and not as many as their critics were freaking out about that they did. A lot of things that just didn't actually happen. So fear is a big motivator there. In the biggest one, fear of jail. If I break a certain law, I could go to jail. On a more interpersonal level, though, fear of being outcast from a group that is important to you. And again, this last bullet on here, fear presented as a group or groups being presented to you as a threat. So this happens a lot. Let's take a look. Let's get away from modern examples for a moment, because one of the favorite examples of these are kind of propaganda from the 50s that's trying to make people afraid. Notice the fear being used in these examples. It's not rational argument to make you not like these things. It is fear being made to make you afraid of these things. In the 50s, communism was the big one. Today, we still throw communism around, but socialism is the fear word that gets thrown around a lot, even though most people don't seem to really know what socialism is. Marijuana, we mentioned that earlier, norm that changed. There was a lot of propaganda trying to scare people away from marijuana. Reefer Madness, a very popular propaganda film. Now, if any of you have any experience at all, not that you should or should not, with marijuana, take a look at some of the stuff Reefer Madness said you'd end up doing if you went off to someone's apartment and smoked a doobie. Oh my God.
Insane, a condition caused by the drug marijuana to which he was addicted. It is recommended, Your Honor, that the defendant be placed in an institution for the criminally insane for the rest of his natural life.
The next tragedy may be that of your daughter, or your son, or yours, or yours, or yours.
People flying out windows there. Oh my God. Never been to a party like that one. Oh, yeah. But that kind of thing is used a lot. Again, the fear mongering. In fact, one of the reasons that the DARE program to try to keep kids from using drugs turned out to be a tremendous failure is it used too much fear mongering in its attempt to pull them away. And here's a big problem with that. You're telling little Johnny that people are going to be jumping out windows and killing each other if they smoke a doobie. Well, little Johnny may know some people who do, and they don't act like that at all. Find the reaction is quite different. If a person can realize that you are exaggerating a point, they're not likely to listen to the rest of your message. They're not going to take it seriously. Now, that can be a real problem because you may have a genuine, valid point about something, but if you exaggerate the evidence for your point, you're going to lose support for it. Now, here's a little preview of some of the political propaganda we're going to look at. Notice here, both Trump and Obama associated with Hitler, right? Anytime you don't like a politician, you'll throw Hitler in there as an example, and both sides will do that. And each side will claim it's valid that they did it, but it's not valid when the other side does it to them. So, and this is where we get into propaganda, and specifically when we say sociological propaganda, that is an attempt to bring you into the norms of a group and kind of reinforce those norms. Political propaganda especially is rarely targeted at the other side to try to convert them. It's targeted at its own side to try to reinforce your beliefs and most of the time to turn you against any influence, countering influence coming from the other side. Now, I may have mentioned earlier, when I was at Eastern, I taught a class there on the psychology of deception. And one of the key things, if you're going to deceive someone, is to make sure you get them to stop listening to other information sources that could counter what they're telling you. Always be cautious of someone who tells you, don't read this, or don't listen to this outlet, or don't watch this network, because they lie to you. Because anyone who is putting a lot of energy into telling you how other people are lying to you may be deceptive themselves. That's not always true. Sometimes people are trying to alert you to someone being deceptive. But we'll see this as a lot of examples near the end of this. Now, here's where we come around again to the three broad perspectives of sociology. And again, when we say perspectives, each one of these, functionalism, conflict theory, and symbolic interactionism, have their own view of how things work and how to explain the system. So Durkheim, big name in functionalism. Durkheim saw deviance as something that is functional. Again, functionalism feels that every part plays its role. All the parts need to be working together for things to work. Again, they draw an example to the human body. All the systems need to be working well for the entire thing to be working. Durkheim felt that deviance challenges the norms, and in a way, it helps get rid of norms that are not functional anymore. It is possible to hold on to a tradition simply for the sake of tradition. We're doing it this way because this is the way we've always done it, even though that tradition may not be functional anymore. Deviation from that challenges that and helps a new, more functional system work its way in. So challenge the current view on things. Basically make sure, even if a deviation comes in and doesn't catch on, it challenges a current system and makes us pay attention to it and say, is this still working? Does this still function? And again, punishment itself helps hold on to current norms. Now we see a lot of different variations of deviation. There's a slide in here that shows a PETA demonstration. And again, the key here is to draw attention. We're going to see different forms of protest in here, sometimes just to get attention, sometimes to cause disruption, depending on the different group and how they want to get their message across in these cases. So this brings us to Merton and the strain theory. And this predicts that whether you conform or deviate really depends on whether you have access to the ability to meet the norms. We're going to see a short video clip here in just a second, but let me set this one up because they're going to mention this one in here. Let's say that there's a norm that I just work hard and I'll become successful and have a lot of money. Well, what if I don't actually have an opportunity to work into success? Hard work itself does not guarantee success. In fact, in our culture right now, the people that are out there busting their butts the hardest and putting in the most effort working during a day are not wealthy people. They work hard just to maintain a norm, don't necessarily have the opportunity or access to go beyond that, where others kind of seem to get that path paved ahead of them. Let's take a short look at a clip here on Robert Merton's strain theory.
The functionalist approach argues that societies work and hold together through shared values that help to regulate our behaviour. But this doesn't mean these values necessarily have positive effects for all people at all times. They can also have negative effects. And this is the key to understanding Merton's strain theory. He argued that while the values of modern societies encourage people to become wealthy and successful by their own efforts, many people, particularly those in the lower classes, have little opportunity to achieve these goals legitimately. So they're in a state of anomie. That is, there's a gap between what they're encouraged to want and their chances of getting it. This makes it more likely that a proportion of them will try to achieve these things by illegitimate means, through crime, or will reject these values altogether and turn to violence, vandalism and deviance. The key point here is we need to see the origins of crime and deviance not simply in the characteristics of individuals, but in the structure and values of modern capitalist societies. If I had to summarise strain theory in an everyday phrase, I'd say, be careful what you wish for.
Yeah, and as we see in this slide, Merton identified 5 ways in which people may respond to not getting access to what they need to meet the norms that are being put up there in front of them. You can just conform, go along with it, accept what part of it you get. You can choose some other way to get it. When we say choose criminal or deviant means, let's say that I am expected to get really high test scores, but I'm not given all the information I need to get those scores to help me do it. Let's say, for example, you're supposed to get a really high score on this test, but I'm only giving you 15 minutes to do it, and it really should be an hour-long test. You may choose to cheat to get through that test, which is a deviant mean there. Ritualism is when you would reduce your goals in order to conform. So again, I'm working really hard every day at a job. I'm told that that's going to bring me success, but it doesn't. I will reduce my goal from I want to be rich or I want to be upper middle class to I just want to maintain a middle class standard and I'm happy with that, and that allows me to conform. Retreatism and rebellion are very similar. I may just reject the norm. Screw off, I don't care about that. I'm not going to do that. Or, as in case of rebellion, completely replace society's goals with my own. If you go down to Columbia Gorge east of Portland, basically down around Hood River, you get a lot of consistent winds coming up the river there, a lot of choppy waves on the Columbia, a lot of windsurfers there that enjoy riding the choppy waves on the Columbia there. There are a lot of people who live in Hood River who are just there. What their thing is they just enjoy going out, riding the waves out there. They work just whatever odd jobs they can get in the area just to survive, but their thing is just to go out and enjoy the waves. They don't care what job they have. They have basically taken society's goal for themselves of here, achieve this career, achieve this long-term thing, and replace it with their own. I just want to have a good time. I just want to go out and hang with friends and enjoy the river, and I'll just do this other job. Another form of rebellion there that's more serious, more deadly, are terrorists and freedom fighters. The reason I put those two on there is because the label you get depends on which side you're on. Which brings us to social disorganization theory. Now, keep in mind here, there's going to be some crossover in all of these. There's going to be some crossover in the three main perspectives, but there are nuances to each one. So note those in the reading material. Social disorganization theory, as a lot of these are going to do, is going to look at environment as a primary cause of deviance. So as it says here on the slide, is most likely to occur in communities with weak social ties and the absence of social control. There's a basic human trait we're bringing in on here, and that is the tendency for people to step outside the rules if they feel they can get away with it. And that's a key. So let's back up a little bit here and come back to the psych side, because we bleed over sociology and psychology a lot here. They did this in London several years ago, where they had a community where there was a lot of crime on the street, and they put in surveillance cameras, and crime diminished tremendously after that. A lot of people push for greater punishment for certain crimes to stop those crimes. The biggest factor in whether someone will try to get away with something that is considered deviant is the likelihood of getting caught. And with those cameras out there, it increased the likelihood of getting caught. Now that's kind of diminished over time, that effect, because there are so many cameras out, we're being watched so often, that we've stopped paying attention to the degree to which we are observed in public. So we don't think about it as often. So obviously, if you gave people the death penalty for speeding, that would reduce speeding. In fact, you would probably have limits in your car where you could set that you can't go over a certain speed at in a certain area to prevent you from doing it. You're not going to try it. But let's go to the extreme here when it comes to things like murder. Does the death penalty discourage murder? You may have heard the stats that death penalty states actually have higher murder rates than non-death penalty states. That's actually true for the most part. But the death penalty isn't having a factor there. What happened is states that had high murder rates already were more likely to bring back the death penalty to try to reduce them, and it didn't. Why doesn't it? Because in the case of murder, at the time someone commits a murder, they don't think they're going to get caught, so the punishment doesn't really matter. In fact, for a lot of people, the idea of life in prison is actually worse than the idea of the death penalty, and there's some people who seek the death penalty as a result of that. So it's the idea of getting caught, the likelihood of getting caught. And this is where environment is an extreme influence. Come back again to psychology and the idea of mob mentality. If a lot of people around you are doing something that you wouldn't normally go along with, you are more likely to go along with it because others around you are doing it. So here's where we say criminality is a trait more of the environment than of the individual. For example, let's say I create a clone of myself, exactly the same person, exactly the same traits, but I'm going to put each of my clones in a different environment. So one of them I'm going to put in a middle class, maybe slightly upper middle class environment where I have enough money to pay my bills, I live comfortably, I have enough money to put a little into savings every month, so I'm not concerned about finances at all. The other one is living in a more impoverished environment and is actually having trouble paying the bills, is behind on some of them, and is struggling to keep up. So we take each of those clones and we have a situation where you're coming out of the grocery store and you find a wallet on the ground in the parking lot, has a bunch of cash in it. Let's say a couple $100 or maybe $1,000, something like that. The middle class version of me, because I don't need any more money, is likely to look at that and say, oh my God, this person really needs this. I may look at the ID and contact them and give the wallet back to them. The impoverished version of me is likely to say, oh my God, they lost this and I could really use this. I'm more likely to at least be tempted to take the money, ditch the wallet in the parking lot for someone else to find it. Exact same personality traits, exact same upbringing, but the environment that I'm in has influenced whether I am going to steal or cheat or something else if the opportunity is presented to me. And that's what the social disorganization theory is centering on. And we're going to see several others that do the same thing. So again, impoverished areas, not just because of your situation, but because the others around you are also more likely to cheat or steal or something else to improve their situation there. So cultural deviance theory, again, this is similar to that last bit I mentioned before, that the environment around you sets up what you're likely to do or attempt or how you're likely to see the world. The people you hang around with have a big influence on what you see as acceptable behavior or not acceptable behavior. That's why it says here, poverty itself has a deviant expectation. Poverty creates a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? So if I'm told that as a poor person I'm likely to steal or cheat, that actually increases the chances I may do that if I have the opportunity to do that. All right. So that's functionalism. Every part kind of fits in there. Now we come over to conflict theory. Again, the three major perspectives in sociology: functionalism, conflict theory, and symbolic interactionism. We're on the middle one now, conflict theory. In this case, they don't see deviance as being a positive thing. Deviance is a byproduct of the inequality of the system, where some people not only just have more than others, but they have better access to resources than others do. So here we come in again to Karl Marx. Yeah, and the idea of an unequal system. We're going to hit Marx more as we go on. Well, we'll hit that again in a minute when we get to the next section on social control. But again, Marx's idea of the bourgeois, those are the people who own the means of production, the business owners. And they can actually use the power they have to kind of reinforce the system, establish social order. They have more influence over the laws that get passed. And again, when we come back to media, we've looked at media before, and we will again. They influence media a lot more. So when it comes to the proletariat, which is the rest of us, the bourgeois can influence how we perceive right and wrong. All right. Think about attitudes towards unions. The kind of work to keep employee wages at least reasonable, if not beneficial. Who benefits the most from you having a negative attitude towards unions or being a member of a union. Obviously, the business owners and the elites that pull the most money out of the system benefit the most if I can get you to have a negative attitude towards unions and therefore not want to form one or join one. So that's the attitude, that's the idea of conflict theory here. Now we get away from Marx for a moment and come over to Mills, the author of the first paper you did a project on. Very similar here, talking about how the power elite. Now Mills is emphasizing that point of the people in power having control over your attitudes. They get to choose the rules favor them. They get to determine what counts as a crime or not. So they're the ones setting that system, setting that in place. I mentioned unions as an example. Another one is your attitude towards other people wanting pay raises, right? Everyone feels they should get paid more than they do. But when you hear about some other group wanting a pay raise, you get thrown with a lot of propaganda and media telling you they don't deserve it, as if they're wanting more than you have. And we have to hit for a moment here, just to plant a seed for something later, how businesses make their money, right? In a capitalist system, now we're not blasting capitalism, it's just the easiest one to use because that's the system we're in. There's two ways for a company to make profit. One is very obvious: charge more for your product or service than it actually costs you to provide it, and you get a little extra on top of that. But the other one is to not pay your employees entirely what their labor is worth to your company. Let's say that I work at a mill, and looking at my output as an employee, I could say my work, my effort is worth $25 an hour to this company. That's how much they make off the labor I put into it. But my income is only $18 an hour. My employer is actually grabbing $7 an hour worth of value and keeping it for themselves. And they're also working to convince me to be happy with the money I'm making. We will hit this point later because it comes up several times. But the old saying, hard work is its own reward, conflict theory would argue, especially the power elite argument here, it is the power elite that tell you that so that you won't seek more. I'm a good worker, I'm a hard worker, I earn everything I get. Actually, the power elite model here by Mills would say you actually earn a lot more than you get, but you give part of it away without even knowing you're giving it away. Another aspect of that they would look at is look at your gross income, how much you actually make on a paycheck, but then look at how many deductions come out of that. Who all is taking money out of your check? It's not just the federal government, it's not just the state and local governments. Your employer themselves are taking part of it out, especially if they provide medical coverage for you. They're not actually providing it entirely. You are paying a big chunk of that. You see how much comes out of your check for your medical coverage. You don't know how much of that they're paying. They could be hitting you with a lot more than they're paying, and you don't know that because that's not listed on there. So conflict theory really hits social class as a big determinant of what counts as crime and what doesn't, and especially how much punishment is leveled out. So they say here, as it says in the slide, class has a big influence on the punishment you get and what is perceived as a crime and what is not. As it says here, when we look at the losses due to low-income crime, such as burglary, for example, $15.3 billion a year lost to the low-income type criminal, just stealing things from other people. However, Bernie Madoff's Ponzi scheme, which hit the wealthy, $50 billion was lost in that. In that one thing, more than the entire annual loss for several years from just common crime. Yet the punishment was different there. The bottom part of this slide, what does it take to get a 10-year sentence for possession of either crack or standard cocaine? Crack is seen as a drug of low-income people. Cocaine is seen as a drug of higher-income people. 50 grams of crack gets you a 10-year sentence, but it takes 5,000 grams of cocaine to get you a 10-year sentence. And in fact, if you're higher end, higher income, you can also hire better lawyers who are likely to get you a better deal or to get you off on the charge. So that is the conflict theory side of it. In general, keep this part in mind, conflict theory always looks at the differences in access to resources. So if there was a test question or a homework question asking which of these represents conflict theory, which one of them represents an unequal access to the resources, and that one will be conflict theory. Here we come to symbolic interactionism. Now let's back up for just a minute. Functionalism and conflict theory look at the broad culture. They take a big lens and look at large groups and entire communities. In symbolic interactionism, we're coming down to our focus on the individual. Of the three perspectives, this is the one that leans towards psychology more than the others do. So the idea of labeling theory here in symbolic interactionism is that the public determines what counts as deviant, and that is going to change from region to region, and it will also change over time as attitudes change over time. Let's go back to the legalization of marijuana. Walking through your neighborhood today, if you're in a state that has legalized marijuana, and we are, Washington State, and you can smell the scent of marijuana in the air, that doesn't have the same impact that it would 20 or 30 years ago when it was illegal. It is not as deviant. Now that is something that has to take some time to change, because people who were raised with it as something deviant and illegal, they take a while to change their attitude toward it. So we have things, I'm going to jump right to the last bullet on this slide first. Master status is how you would describe yourself. If you're describing yourself to others, the labels you would apply to yourself. Are any of those deviant or non-deviant labels? Now let's go back to the others. The idea of primary deviance is just relatively something minor. It doesn't change that label that you apply to yourself or the label that other people would apply to you. So the example on the slide here of speeding tickets, usually people in your community or your group are not going to suddenly think you're a criminal because you got a speeding ticket, even though technically you broke the law. And there's some people who will push the idea that if you broke the law, you're a criminal. Doesn't matter what the law was, you broke it, you're a criminal. Doesn't matter what you do the rest of your life, if you broke this law, you're a criminal. Usually things like this do not change that perception. Secondary deviance is one that will change the attitude other people have toward you and the attitude you have toward yourself. Now let's roll back here for a moment, and we're bleeding over into psychology again. This is an issue we can have in elementary schools when it comes to dealing with aggressive behavior and violence in the school. If I take little Johnny and he got kind of into a little scuffle at recess, and I start laying on him that he's aggressive or too violent, that can be a label he starts to apply to himself, and he starts to act that out. Well, if you're going to see me that way, then I'm going to be that way. They see me as being aggressive anyway, so I'm going to go punch another kid at recess. Also on the psych side, this can be a problem with labels of mental dysfunction or behavioral dysfunction. Once I get a label on myself, I may actually act that label. Other people may interpret my behavior by that label. Let's use attention deficit disorder as an example here. Let's say little Johnny got labeled or diagnosed with ADHD, attention deficit hyperactive disorder. Little Johnny is at a park playing with a friend who does not have that diagnosis. They're both having a good time. Energy is amping up. They are both acting equally kind of hyper as they play. Little Johnny's behavior is more likely to get labeled as abnormal or dysfunctional because he has that ADHD label on him. He's not allowed to be as kind of energetic and aggressive as the other child is because of the label attached to him. Very similarly here is Sutherland's idea of differential association. And this also comes in to, again, mob mentality, group behavior. We tend to mold our ideas based on the social environment around us. And the behavior we see other people engaging in, if enough of them engage in it, our brain tells us that's acceptable behavior if others are doing it. Mob mentality, group behavior, peer pressure, they all fall in to this category. Now, a big one here at the end of this slide, when it says deviance is multi-generational, here's where parents are the biggest model, especially the first model, of what is deviant behavior, what is not. Are you likely to engage in deviant behavior? We're going to hit this a couple times because I believe we've hit it before. When you, as a parent, if you tell a child, do as I say, not as I do, most of what children learn, they will learn from observation. So if you are telling your child something different than your behavior has a greater impact than what you tell them. Okay. So we have a couple that are similar again here. Control theory. Again, this one kind of creates a bit of a separation there. This is part of the social bond idea also. If I don't feel a real strong connection to my community or my environment or some other social group, I can engage in deviance as a response to that. So here in control theory, we have 4 types of social bond: our connection to others. When we say our investment in the community, how attached do we feel to the community? How important is either the reputation or the success of the community to us? Which is related to involvement here. To what degree do I participate in activities with either the community or other social groups around me? And then the beliefs there, do I share the values of the people around me? Now, politically, we can look at divisions here where you may have, for example, we can get either side of this, put people who are politically conservative in a politically liberal environment. They're not going to have that same feeling of attachment. Put people who are liberal in a very conservative environment. They're not going to feel that attachment. So that's going to vary a lot in how deviant you may engage in behavior there. Again, spring 2020, lockdowns in a lot of states, an attempt to kind of help control the spread of the coronavirus. The protesters stepping up saying we need to open it up are more likely to be stepping up in states that are controlled by the other party than in states controlled by their own. More likely to respect the rules around you if your political party is in control of the system that's telling you to do it. And you can see that all over the place there. So we've done an introduction to deviance. We have introduced the concept of social control. I know I said it was a 2-parter, but we're going to do social control and propaganda next as its own video. And that's where we're going to hit a lot of propaganda. You're going to be getting upset over that, and everyone will, because I'm going to hit on everyone in that one. But let's head on over into that one. Yeah.